Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the closest you've ever come to dying? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I got caught in a storm 30 miles offshore. The storm blew out from onshore and caught us off guard. My friend had turned the radio off because there were no storm forecasts. We were tied off to an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico and catching snapper and sharks, drinking and even swimming, completely oblivious to what was coming at us. When we heard the low rumble of thunder drifting out to us from the direction of the land, fear set in. We were too far out to see land at all, so it was just us and whatever was coming at us. The first rumble was barely there. We paused for a second, but decided it was a plane or something. The second rumble snapped us to attention. We pulled up our lines, tied everything down, and hit full speed, heading toward shore. My friend turned his radio back on, heard the weather advisory, and that's when he said, "Oh shit." As the storm rolled over us, it was harrowing. The sea took on this odd color blend, kind of purple on one side and green on the other. The waves quickly picked up, and we began catching air every time we'd crest a wave. Our boat was not big at 25 feet, and we were now fighting 12-foot seas and wind pushing back at us at 50 miles per hour. The only way to survive was to keep the nose of the boat straight into the wind or we'd roll. I had tied down in the back near the motors and was sitting cross-legged with a rope wrapped around both wrists tied to both sides of the boat. We were smashing into the water when we'd come back down from being airborne, and at one point I recall sitting waist deep in water, hearing the motors trying to drown out as we fell rear first in the water. They picked back up though, and we kept going. I had my eyes closed at first, but I decided that if I die, I want to see what kills me. Lightning was everywhere. The rain was blasting hard in our faces, and I watched a tornado spin sideways overhead. I'm not even sure which side was the origin and which side was the tail. It was just this huge tube of darkness rotating over us. The boat was flying over each wave, smashing back into the water with so much force that we were all afraid it would break apart. My friend yelled to everyone that the boat hull was buoyant, so if it shattered, grab a piece and hold on. The motors were screaming when we'd fly and then choking down when we'd hit the water with massive force. This happened hundreds of times, and each time I think we all feared it would be the last time we'd hear it. We took turns yelling coordinates to my friend as he kept us facing straight into the wind. He had a handheld GPS that we used for monitoring our direction. After about an hour, we finally hit the backside of the storm. I remember my friend cheering, and I was happy but also sort of numb. We were about 10 miles off course to the east due to the wind we had faced into, so we had a longer trip back than when we headed out. When we got back to shore, all of our partners were yelling, and when the boat was on the trailer, we all hugged and thanked my friend for keeping us alive. We were late coming back, and they had feared the worst. Everyone had given up on the fish we had in the cooler, except for me, so I stayed up until 2 or 3 a.m. cleaning the fish at home, then tossed the fillets in the fridge, showered, and went to bed. No way was I wasting those fish, not after we nearly gave up our lives to catch them. This may or may not be the closest I've come to dying, but it's certainly the most memorable. Carbon monoxide poisoning on a job site. The helpless feeling of crawling out of that basement while my body got weaker and weaker is something I still think about often. Crazy dreams and the cheapest high I've ever had. LOL. A guy tried to beat my head in with a hammer. I woke up in the hospital with 6 fractured ribs, a broken eye socket, a broken finger, a collapsed lung, and 23 stitches in my face. I was living on the streets addicted to drugs, and came across a man who apparently wanted to kill someone. I found out later that I wasn't the only one he tried to kill. I'm 9 months clean now. I had just turned 19 and I was in basic training at Fort Leonard Wood for the Army. I got held over and had to retrain after a hip injury kept me from graduating. I had to redo some of the training since I got out of a company that was a few weeks behind where I'd stopped after my initial injury. I'm not sure how long I was with that second company, but after a wall locker check one morning, I suddenly woke up in an ambulance and couldn't move. Through moments of consciousness and amnesia, I was told I fell and broke my neck at the confidence course. The doctors waited for my family to drive from Pennsylvania to Missouri after they would do this surgery and explain to them that my prognosis would be a wheelchair if I was lucky, or a body bag, after discovering parts of my C7 vertebrae impacted by spinal cord. A chaplain was summoned to read me my last rites. I had Lutheran listed on my dog tags, and he looked like he had just pulled himself out of a crypt. That was the first time I remember realizing I may actually die, but I was too drugged up to get emotional. The surgeon removed the shattered bone from inside and around my spinal cord, bolted a titanium plate from 6C to T1, and waited for me to wake up. When I came around, I was back in my hospital room, and I was surrounded by doctors. My surgeon was one of them, and he explained that the doctors were his colleagues from around the country who wanted to see me move with their own eyes, after having bone removed from my spinal cord with no paralysis. The doctors had me pushing against them with my hands and feet. They were nearly speechless. I didn't care. I was too messed up on medications to understand the gravity of what was happening. June 1st was my 20 years ago when it happened. I questioned for a while why I'd survived something like that, and I'm happy to say that I think I'm living the reason now. Widowmaker heart attack at age 55. I don't recall any of this, but I was told I complained of shoulder pain during the weekly flag football game. One astute player quickly drove me to the hospital. I walked in and collapsed. 15 shocks over 5 hours, put in an induced coma and attached to an ECMO, which pumps and oxygenates your blood. I woke up a week later and was in the hospital for a month. 8 years ago. Living my best life. When I was in Afghanistan, we were on our forward operating base and had just concluded a mission brief. I went to the latrine and realized I left my hat on the table, so I turned around quickly to get it. About 5 seconds later, a rocket hit right outside the latrine door, exactly where I should have been. It ended up killing our dog, but it should have been me. Had I not been around the corner of a HESCO barrier to get my hat, I'd be gone. Hate to hear that you guys lost your dog, but you were meant to not be there, so I hope you kept that hat. I went tubing on a river. When I got to the place that rents the tubes, it was absolutely packed. Apparently it was a very popular dam release day, which made the river flow faster and more turbulent. I never thought twice about it. I hopped in my tube and started floating down the river. I immediately realized that what dam release day really meant was rapids. The whole ride was dicey and scary. Right near the end were the biggest rapids so far. As I go through, I get caught by the current, flip over, and smash my head into a boulder. I was immediately dragged under. To my horror, I'm pressed to the bottom of the river by the current and can't get up. Worse, because I hit my head right as I went under, I didn't get a full breath. I've luckily always been able to hold my breath for about 2 to 3 minutes at a time. I was underwater for about 1.5 minutes and was about to give up and resign myself to my fate when I suddenly just popped out. When I came up, my wife was screaming her head off, thinking I was dead. 30 more seconds and I would have been done. I learned a new respect for the power of water. Not me, but a friend of my dad's once went to a football-soccer match. While he was queuing, a couple of guys approached him, and one asked if he could switch tickets with him so the two could sit together. My dad's friend agreed and swapped tickets, ended up sitting the opposite side stadium. That football match took place at Hillsborough Stadium on April 15, 1998. His original ticket was right in the middle of where the disaster happened. He never found out if the guy he traded tickets with survived or not. When I was young, I was playing around in my dad's old car. I accidentally closed the trunk, which didn't have the emergency latch thing most new cars have. It was also the middle of summer in the south. I thought for sure I was done with fire. I screamed and panicked for a while, and thankfully my dad found me after not too long of being trapped. Let's just say I've tried extremely hard to block that from my memory since then. I hate thinking about what could have been from just an accident. As a pedestrian, I was involved in a hit and run when crossing the road with a speeding van. Thankfully, it brushed the front side of the van, so I was sort of thrown and sent spinning wildly. I was fine, or a broken arm, but in those fleeting moments where the van rounded the corner and I knew I was going to be hit, my life did literally flash before my eyes. Time felt like it was slowed down, and I managed to think about how I wasn't going to be able to escape it, that I was about to die too young, and that I had many regrets. I thought about all of this in depth in the space of about 5 seconds. It was crazy. They never caught the driver. Pretty damn close. When you suffer a type A aortic dissection, you start with about a 5% chance of survival and less than 24 hours to live. Your odds improve to about 25% if they correctly diagnose you before you die. Your odds are up to about 50 if they can get you on an operating table. Then it's just a small matter of a 10-hour open heart surgery where they chill your blood down to put you into hypothermia, stop your heart so they can cut out your aortic valve, the exit valve on your heart, ascending aorta, and aortic arch, replace it with silicone, then fire your heart back up and hope for the best. I was on cardiopulmonary bypass for about 3.5 hours. That's when your blood is being circulated out through a machine where it's chilled and oxygenated before being pumped back in. I accidentally impaled the inside of my throat on a plastic stick that you close your blinds with that has a hook on it. I was 16. It went inside my soft palate almost up to my nose. I pulled it out and spat a chunk of meat. Ugh. Doctors gave me 10 stitches and my operation lasted 2.5 hours. They said that they had to be really careful not to nick my artery because I missed it by a few millimeters. I would have choked to blood on my death. When I was in middle school, I was at a stoplight with my adopted older brother. The light had just turned green, so we were crossing the intersection in our little white car when a black truck with a lift kit decided he didn't want to stop for the red light. I was sitting in the passenger seat, and this truck was coming at us from the right. All I remember is seeing the front end of the truck flying at me. He must have been doing about 80 in a 25. I just thought to myself, yep, this is how I die. So I closed my eyes and braced myself for that truck to crush me. The person who was driving the truck swerved at the last second and ripped our front bumper off our car. I still feel fear when I think about that. I jumped off of a jetty to swim across a small bay. I had done it many times as a teenager with friends when I was in my early 20s and in the best shape of my life. Late summer north of Boston, I got about 30 yards of rocks and my limbs started going numb. I realized I was too far away to make it back and panic set in, but I couldn't move my arms and legs and began to sink. The panic stopped, and I recall looking up at the surface of the water with a total sense of calm and quiet, realizing I was about to drown. Then I saw a white flash, and what must have been an adrenaline response kicked in, and I felt like I exploded up out of the water and immediately began swimming back to the side of the jetty. I climbed up onto the rocks and sat there and hyperventilated for what felt like an hour. Don't swim alone. Both barfing and pooping my guts out alone in a hotel bathroom due to food poisoning. I couldn't keep the water down. I couldn't get to the tub to make it easy to clean up at least. I just laid there, severely dehydrated on the bathroom floor, in a pool of my own barf and waste. The bathroom is humid with a thick, coppery stench, that just hung in the air. All I could do was just not move and get a little rest while in a pool of my own sickness. Eventually, I got back the strength to clean myself, and the bathroom before checking out, went downstairs to the lobby and collapsed. I started barfing again in the ambulance on the way to the ER. Fun times. I got admitted to the hospital for a suspected appendicitis, which turned out to be severe Crohn's disease. Apparently, at one point I called my parents and told them that I felt like I was dying, but I don't remember it at all. I also told my doctors at one point that I had this horrible impending sense of doom feeling in my chest, like something really bad was going to happen, but I didn't know what, and they immediately started to take my case more seriously. Apparently, impending sense of doom is a legitimate symptom and can be a sign that you're about to have a heart attack or that you're dying. I've now been in remission from Crohn's disease for 2 years, thanks to infusions of biological medication that I get every 6 weeks. After eating Panda Express, I got a bad case of food poisoning. I drained my body of everything I had. I actually fainted on the toilet, so my wife drove me to the hospital. I told the nurse I was feeling faint and asked for fluids, but they were adamant about drawing blood instead. The nurse told me I am just anxious and psyching myself up. Within 5 seconds of drawing blood, I blacked out, woke up to a code card, and about 10 doctors and nurses prepared to shock me with an AED. I look over and see my wife crying. I asked what happened, and they told me I flatlined for 10 seconds or so. The nurse who drew the blood looked more pale than I was. Needless to say, I was fine and had a vasovagal response. I've not stepped foot on a Panda Express since then. We were doing 4th of July fireworks and stupidly had a small trailer full of them only 20 feet away from where we detonated them. Oh boy. A mortar failed and only flew a few feet up before it exploded. This caused the fireworks in the trailer to ignite. We ran over to grab the little ones, but we were too late, and they all went off. I got away with a few burns, but as I was trying to get away, I looked back to see my dad, 75 at the time, slowly walking because he couldn't run. I went back and used my body to block the shells that were now flying everywhere. It took a few hits to the legs and back and got some bad burns, but nothing serious, luckily. I swear it was like something straight out of a comedy movie. I have an autoimmune disorder that causes both B12 anemia and iron deficiency anemia. I did not know this, but I was slowly losing so much blood that I didn't notice how bad I felt. I kinda knew because walking up a flight of stairs would wind me up, and I was only 31 and 140 pounds. I thought it was because I was in bad shape, so I was going to the gym daily and running on the treadmill, lifting weights, etc. And when you're a woman and severely anemic, you don't get your period. So this happened, and I took multiple pregnancy tests, all negative. I went to my gynecologist, and she ran tons of tests, saying maybe I was stressed or something to have such a late period. Later, she called me in a panic because my hemoglobin was 3.9 and my iron was undetectable. This led to my diagnosis and treatment. I now have a hematologist to monitor my disease. My iron and hemoglobin are now great. A year later, my period disappeared and I was feeling weak and tired. So I rushed to my hematologist. And this time, it was not anemia, but a baby. And I think it's so funny that I thought I was pregnant, but it was anemia. I thought my anemia was acting up, but I was pregnant. I overdosed on antidepressants trying to kill myself at 16. I remember being outside of my body and watching doctors work on me. And I remember standing in the waiting room and watching my dad wait to see if I would be okay. I remember watching myself in the ambulance while the EMT shoved his hands in my mouth, trying to hold my tongue and yelling at me, telling me not to swallow my tongue, telling me he's trying to save my life, and asking if I wanted to die. I drove an ATV off of a 30-foot cliff when I was 14. I got caught in a snowstorm and almost froze to death as a result. If my brother and uncle hadn't been with me, I'd have frozen to death in a gravel pit. Instead, I broke my leg in 2 places, broke my arm, dislocated my shoulder, had a 360-degree labrum tear, a broken scapula, and got a concussion for my troubles. I was in the snow for 4 hours waiting for emergency services because of how remote I was, and by the time they got to me, they estimated that I had roughly another hour before I would have been unalive. Also, now 20 years later, occasionally have neck and jaw troubles from smacking my helmet off of rocks. Don't buy kids ATVs unless you plan on riding with them or installing a speed limiter. I had a 20-foot extension ladder turned backward, 16 years old, didn't know any better, and was almost at the very top trying to clean some rafters in our warehouse. The ladder slipped from under me and started sliding. I dug my hands into the wood siding so much that I had like 75 splinters removed from my fingers, but that only slowed the slide. Luckily, Bob, an old stoner who was one of our best guys, was on a forklift about 10 feet from me, and when I started sliding, he threw the lift in forward and pulled it perpendicular to the ladder, and it caught on the back tire to stop the slide. I don't know if I would have been killed, but it wouldn't have felt good. Thank God Bob was there, and rest in peace, Bob. Throughout my early childhood, I've been stung by multiple bees and wasps. One day when I was 9, I stepped on a bee in my garden. It hurt, but I didn't feel anything. I go inside feeling funny and having a little difficulty breathing. I'm strongly allergic to pollen and different grasses, so it wasn't that unusual. I sit down and started feeling nauseous and vomit everywhere. I remember when I was 9 and I had no idea what was going on, so I screamed for my mom. She comes in and looks horrified. Apparently my entire head was massively swollen. She asked what happened, and I told her a bee stung me. We pack up our shit and drive to the hospital. I literally vomited like 15 times in the car, progressively being able to breathe less and less. My body went lethargic, and my father had to carry me into the hospital to the emergency room. I don't remember much afterwards, even though I was awake. My memories start again, where I was in the hospital room and fine again, except for an oxygen mask and IVs. Doctors told me literally a handful of minutes later that I would have died. I'm pretty traumatized from the event and still don't walk barefoot in the grass outside, even though I went to get shots for 5 years and I'm practically invincible to bees now. The bee stung me, and I almost died because of an allergy attack.